Hi besties, my name is Mina. Welcome to my channel, Mina Reads. Today we're going to be talking about my 25 for 2025. So these are the 25 books that are from my physical TBR that I absolutely must read in 2025. It just has to happen. I like creating these little lists every year. I think it's a fun way to sort of project what the vibes are going to be for the year and what I think I'm going to be reaching for most often. So let's get into it. The first book that is on my 25 for 2025 is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This book is a part of the Middle-earth along I am doing with Aaron from Booked and Busy, as well as a few other creators. I will leave the announcement video to that in the description below so that you can get a little bit more of the details, starting with The Hobbit, and then we're going to do the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So every month we are going to be reading a book and discussing it in a live show. So for January, our book is The Hobbit, which I have already started. I'm not very far into it, but I have already started it. And obviously this is a fantasy classic, but we're following this character named Bilbo, who is a hobbit. And hobbits are not the most prone to adventure, but Bilbo has been enlisted by the wizard Gandalf to join a crew of dwarves and undertake an adventure and steal something. So that's what this is about. It's sort of light and fun and a little bit more airy than the rest of the series tends to be. So far there's a lot of singing in it, which I don't know that I love, but I'm reading it. And then, as I said, we're doing the Middle-earth along, and every month we are going to be reading one of the books from the trilogy as well after we finish The Hobbit. So I have these really gorgeous paperback editions. I don't know when they published these ones specifically, but they're so cool. Like, look at this. Let's just have a quick little money spread book edition. Like, look at them. The detail, the vibe, it's too good. So of course we have Fellowship of the Ring, which I have already read, but I'm rereading for the Middle-earth along. And then we have The Two Towers and The Return of the King. So I will be reading this series this year, and I'm very excited about it. It'll also be interesting to see me start and finish a series in a single year, because I'm the kind of girl who will drag out a series reading experience many years. So it'll be interesting to see me actually start and finish a series in one go, kind of. Speaking of that, I once more have Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb on my TBR for the year. This book just is sort of gonna haunt every TBR until I finally get the balls to read it. This is my personal Mount Everest. I never thought that it would happen, but I experienced such like a deep psychological connection and a deep love with Fitz chivalry, Farseer. I love the protagonist in this book so much, and he goes through hell. Like, this is obvious blasphemy, but he suffered worse than Jesus. Like, it's not even funny the amount of torture and torment that Robin Hobb has put this poor character through. And so I struggle so much with reading about him be in struggle and in strife constantly, and the start of this book involves him, like, I don't want to spoil things for anyone, but the start of this book is just so hard, and there's just like a really gut-wrenching like separation of these two characters, and it just like ruins me. And every single time I get to that scene, I'm like, I have to put the book down. So I have started and put this book down about 15 million times, not due to it being a bad book, but due to me being an emotional bitch. So maybe, hopefully, I'll put my big girl panties on and I will just make it through, and I'll just cry my way through the book, because I know that if this is the final book in the trilogy, that she is gonna put Fitz through some stuff. He's gonna go through it. But I do have to read it, and I will continue to publicly shame myself by putting it on every single TBR I make until the end of time, if that's what it takes for me to finally read the book. You know what I'm saying? So that's where we're at with this one. Now for some books that I have a less fraught relationship with. I want to read I Kissed Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. I have read and loved every other novel that I've read by Casey McQuiston. This is a sapphic romance, and it's YA. I don't know how I'm going to feel about that. I'm not really a big YA person. It's just, I've definitely aged out of that category. But I don't hate YA, and I have read some YA recently that I really enjoyed, so it, you know, it should be fine. Hopefully I'm gonna love it. And The Pairing by Casey McQuiston was my top read of 2024, so it just felt right to read another book by them in 2025. So I'll be doing so. Then we have this little teeny tiny book. This is actually a play, Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. This is a book that I have wanted to read for a really long time, and a play that is very famous that I just have not really gotten to experience in any major way. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but I really love plays and I really loved studying them when I was in college and things like that. So I definitely want to get into reading more plays just in my free time for funsies. So I'm going to be reading this one. So since we're sort of on the subject of Black classics, I want to read Beloved by Toni Morrison. I believe I put this on like my 24 for 2024 and I failed that list abysmally, but this list is not cursed. This list, last year's list was cursed. This list is not cursed. Like, we're gonna do this. We're actually gonna complete these books. I have complete and utter faith in myself. It's really gonna happen. So Beloved is a Black modern classic, and I admittedly don't know that much about it. I know that it's sort of a ghost story set during enslavement times, and I know that it's very painful, very heartbreaking, very heart-wrenching, and that's sort of the most I know about it, because I've always wanted to go into this book knowing as little as possible, just to let the journey like take me. Yeah, I definitely need to read this. I feel I cannot call myself a Black literati if I've never read a book by Toni Morrison. It's just really crazy and embarrassing. Also, I own a lot of books by her, so I really should be reading them, you know, so it's on the list. And since we're on the subject of Toni Morrison, I also have a copy of The Bluest Eye that I would like to read. And I know that this is about a young character named Pecola Breedlove, and this is a story about her and her internalized anti-Blackness and the racism that she's experiencing. And I know that it's a really like difficult, sort of traumatizing read from what I have heard from other reviewers and just like the general consensus that I've heard around it, but also a deeply necessary and beautifully written book. So I want to read it. Hopefully I'm going to really enjoy both of these Toni Morrison books and it will lead me deeper into her backlist, but we will see. Rest in peace to that legend. Another classic by a Black literary giant is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I definitely want to read this, and I am getting more and more into reading like 20th century fiction. I don't know, it's just something about it as like the time period that I'm really loving, so it seems like the perfect time for me to read this. I have a very deep love for queer stories that are set in the 1900s, and I'm recently discovering this love, but it's all happening. And so I'm really excited to read Giovanni's Room this year because it is set in the 1950s and we're following this character who is an American expatriate. He's in Paris and he is about to get married to his girlfriend, but he's sort of having his, like, you know, hot boy summer, so to speak, and he meets this man Giovanni, and this is about their relationship and about the protagonist, whose name is escaping me right now. This is about the protagonist David's sort of exploration of like his internalized homophobia and his navigation of this relationship with Giovanni. So I feel like it's going to be really heartbreaking and heart-wrenching, but hopefully beautiful. And I have read 2 books by James Baldwin in the past, and his writing style is just so gorgeous, so I know I'm going to love it. So I'm excited to read it. Another modern classic we have is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I thrifted this one a few months ago, and I just feel like you can't call yourself a real reader if you haven't read certain like major staple classic kind of books. And so I have not read this book and I want to read it. This is of course a dystopian novel about a Christo-fascist regime taking over America and enforcing these like breeding programs on fertile women, because a lot of women in the United States have become infertile, and it's a whole thing. So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna read it. I'm a little bit nervous to read it in the times that we're in right now, just because it feels a little ominous and like we are headed towards that sort of scary political climate. But yes, it's definitely on the list. I'm gonna be reading it. Alright, so then we've got some nonfiction. I want to read A Little Devil in America by Hanif Abdul-Rakib. I have read They Can't Kill Us Till They Kill Us by this author, and he is sort of a poet and an essayist, and he writes about different cultural topics. They Can't Kill Us Till They Kill Us was about music in general, kind of like rock music, and there was this one section that was really beautiful. It was called Fall Out Boy Forever. I absolutely loved the way that he, like, you know, sort of talked about the music and tied that into his personal life. So there was sort of a memoir aspect to it, kind of anecdotal, but also like really poignant, and you know, like a lot of really good points being made just like about culture and about music and artistry and things like that. So I really enjoy his literary voice. This book is specifically about Black performance culture, Black artists and their art, and I'm really excited to read this. I think it's going to be really great. So yeah. This one is one that I can't say I'm excited to read, but it's definitely a necessary read that has been many years in the making, and that is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. And this is her memoir speaking about her experience, her assault, which was a very public spectacle, and just her life and everything like that. So this is a memoir about her, and I think that this will be a very impactful, very necessary read. And I've talked about wanting to read more nonfiction this year, so this is definitely a priority nonfiction read for me. So then next I have Between Lovers and Friends, or Between Friends and Lovers. Between Friends and Lovers by Shirlene Obuobi, maybe, possibly. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. I'm so sorry. This is a romance novel by a new to me Black author. I want to read more books that are being published by Black authors in like the romance sphere traditionally, because I feel like in recent years more and more Black authors are being published traditionally, when previously you kind of had to look towards the indie authors to be able to find Black writers of romance, and so I feel like more and more of them are being published traditionally, but they're being published traditionally and sort of left to flounder, and they really don't get the same kind of marketing campaigns and push that books by, you know, white authors get. So I definitely want to be reading more romance books by Black authors, and using my platform to uplift them if I like them, and if I don't, at the very least we've talked about them together, you know what I'm saying? So I have high hopes that I'm going to enjoy it. I know a lot of people really enjoy this author's previous work On Rotation, and this book is about a girly who's an influencer and she has a crush on a guy. Yeah, so this ends up being like a love triangle thing between her and the guy's friend, who happens to be somebody that she knew in her past, and it was not like a good acquaintance. So it sounds interesting. It sounds a little bit messy. I think that love triangles are kind of out to me. I feel like polyamory is in, love triangles are out, but I think that this sounds like it could be good and messy and entertaining. So I think it'll be a fun read at the very least, and I definitely want to dig into it and try a new to me author, and hopefully I'm really going to enjoy her work. Okay, then we have Good Material by Dolly Alderton. This book is about a guy who just broke up with his girlfriend, and he's really grieving their relationship, also grieving the fact that he sort of didn't win the friends and the divorce. And so this is about just him presumably like spiraling and just dealing with the aftermath of no longer being in this relationship. And also he's a comedian, so that's why it's called Good Material. And he's a comedian, and I guess it's about his like budding comedian career, where he's trying to put himself out there and how that's going for him. I've heard a lot of good things about this book last year, and I think it will be like a really good, really interesting read. I don't often read books about straight male protagonists, so I think that will be like an interesting perspective to read from, especially one that's like mourning a relationship. I feel like it's a lot more often that we see women protagonists who are mourning a relationship with a bad boyfriend and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see this perspective. So I'll see if I like it. Alright, I want to read The Vanished Birds. This is by Simon Jimenez. This is a book that has been pretty much recommended by every single one of my friends that enjoys like sci-fi fantasy. I know this is about a woman who's like traveling through space in a spaceship, and she meets this like mysterious boy who sort of comes out of nowhere. And I know that this is supposed to be like a really moving book to some extent. I don't love knowing too much about a book and about a story before I go into it, especially if it's like a fantasy or sci-fi thing. I like to just go on the journey and have it be what it is. So I don't know too much more than that about it, but hopefully I'm gonna love it. And I want to be in the loop. I want to be in the know since everybody seems to love it. So I'm gonna give it a shot. Then we have Little Rot by Akwaeke Emezi. I really love this author's previous work. I know that this book is about a guy who gets broken up with and he ends up going out with his friends. And this is sort of about like the Nigerian nightlife and some of the seedier aspects that they end up encountering as they're out and about. People have said that this book is like very disturbing and gross and stuff like that. And I don't know what it says about me, but I feel like hearing that it's disturbing and gross is making me more and more interested in reading it. So I'm excited to get into it and see what it's all about. I've loved almost everything I read by Akwaeke Emezi in the past, so I'm excited to see where I land on this one, since it seems to be a very polarizing read. Okay, then we have When We Lost Our Heads by Heather O'Neill. This is a historical fiction novel about two girlies who have a toxic, obsessive, sapphic bond, and that's all I really need to know. Like, it's historical, I believe it's set in the 1800s, and it's about gay people, and also it's going to be toxic, and I love that. That's great. I'm happy. I don't know how other people feel about it. Like, I know that some people feel like, you know, queer representation should be very like aspirational and inspirational, and it should always be like good people and it should never be problematic. But I like it a little bit more when it's problematic and a little bit fucked up, and when the people are not like perfect angels to put on a poster, you know what I'm saying? So I am excited to read this, and I hope it's going to be really good. I know this about these two girls who have this really intense sort of toxic bond, and their parents are trying to like kind of keep them separate, but they just keep finding their way back to each other, and I think it's going to be great. I'm excited to read it. Okay, and then we got two thick girls here. We have Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson and The Will of the Many by, who, I don't know, by James Islington. Both of these are very beloved fantasy books. This is the second book in the Stormlight Archive, and this is the first book in a series. I don't know the name of the series, but this is the first book in a series. I read and really enjoyed Way of Kings last year, and so I want to continue on with the series, and I need to continue on before I start forgetting things about the series and like important plot details, so I need to kind of get a move on, and so that's definitely why it's on the priority TBR. And then I really want to read The Will of the Many because I don't know if you guys know him. You probably do. He's very famous, but his name's Smitty on TikTok. Smitty really loves this book, and he talks about this book quite a lot, and I don't know, I'm compelled by his love of the book. Also, he's very beautiful. That's neither here nor there, but I just was thinking about it, and I'm gonna do what a beautiful person tells me to do. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm gonna do it. Why not? So I'm gonna be reading this one. I know that this is sort of a like Roman inspired fantasy world, and I've seen a lot of comparisons of this book to the like world building in Red Rising, and I enjoyed Red Rising, so hopefully I'm gonna love it. Okay, so then we have A Love Song for Ricky Wilde by Tia Williams. This book, I believe, is set in the 1920s, and it's about this girl who's a socialite, and she's sort of an outcast in her family. She's a little bit eccentric and artistic, and so she ends up going to Harlem and like renting a room, and she's getting into like the whole Harlem Renaissance beat, and she ends up meeting this guy who's a pianist, and this is like a love story between them. I really enjoyed 7 Days in June, and so I'm hoping I'm gonna really love this one, and we'll see how that goes. Then I want to read He Who Drowned the World. This is the sequel to She Who Became the Sun, which is a book I really loved in, I believe it was 2022 when I read it. I really loved it, and I kind of need to reread it probably to read this, but it was a really great start to a fantasy series. Zhu was such an interesting protagonist, and there's a lot of stuff going on in that book that I just really loved, from like a world building standpoint, from a political standpoint. There was also like some romantic elements to the story that I found really interesting, and I'm excited to see how the story is going to end up. So I definitely need to reread that and continue on and finish up the series with this one. I'm excited to do so. I think it'll be a great experience, and yeah. Then, y'all know me, #1 Joe Abercrombie stan. I am so lucky, so privileged that I received a physical ARC from the publishing company. So this is The Devils, his latest release. First books he's publishing outside of the First Law series in a really long time, so I'm excited about that. As much as I love the First Law world, I think it'd be interesting to get something a little bit new from him. So this is a story about a, you know, an unlikely band of characters kind of coming together to achieve a goal. y'all know me, I don't always love to know too much about it all going in, but I know that the one protagonist, he is like a religious figure, and he is assigned a task, and so he has to kind of go about collecting all of these various misfits to help him with a particular thing. Nothing I love more in a fantasy story than a unlikely band of characters kind of coming together for some common goal. It's always fun. It always works for me. I love it, and I think that Joe Abercrombie does a really good job with writing his characters to make them all really distinct, and they all bounce off of each other very well. So I'm excited to see the new cast of characters that we get in this book, and yeah, I think it's going to be really great. This book is releasing in May, so shout out to the publishers for getting me a copy. You're so unbelievably real. I love you deeply, and I don't know how I can thank you. But then we have another fantasy book. We have The Final Strife by Sarah Al-Arifi, maybe? Okay, so this book is the first book in a fantasy series, and this is set in a world that is both African and Arab inspired, and I believe that this book has to do kind of like a revolution, a caste system and a certain hierarchy, and sort of I believe like a system of enslavement in this world. And so this has to do with a revolution and with toppling an empire and things like that. I've also heard that the protagonist, I think, is a lesbian, so we love it. I'm very excited. And yeah, I'm very excited to be starting a new fantasy series and hopefully really loving it, because all of the books are out already, and so if I really enjoy it, I can just grab the other books and binge them. Because I feel like one of my problems is that I start fantasy series and then I have to wait like a year, 2 years, 3 years for the next book to come out, and I just sort of lose interest. So I feel like having all of the books already be out is going to very much help me breeze through this series if I end up enjoying it. So I'm excited. And the last book that I have to share with you on my priority TBR is Disorientation by Elaine Chu. And so from what I really understand about this book is that we're following this girl who's getting her PhD. She's doing her thesis, and she uncovers something in her college's library, her university's library, that is sort of this like huge academic mystery, and it causes a lot of like uproar in the academic community, and it becomes like a whole thing. I'm not entirely sure what any of that means, honestly, but I really like stories about people who are in grad school and their life is a mess and they don't know where they're going next. I really enjoy that for some reason, so I think that this will be a book that I end up really loving. And I've heard really great things about this book, but I feel like there's a sort of ambiguity around it, so I don't really know what it's about. And I feel like even in reading the synopsis, I still don't fully understand the situation, but I'm still excited to read it. So those are my 25 books for 2025. Thank you so much for watching. Wish me luck on reading them all. I think I can. I believe I will. And, you know, we're manifesting it. We're speaking it into existence. I will read all of these books by the end of 2025, and you can hold me to that. Have you read any of these books? Let me know. Did you love them? Did you hate them? What did you rate them? I'd love to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye, you guys. Mwah.